as mentioned, I work currently for government. We are a consultancy providing some services, mostly in the backend services and also recently in the Kubernetes supporting DevOps operation. What I want to talk, however, is my own project where I try to build application using Scala and Spring Boot. And while most of this was very nice and smooth sailing, some of the bits were a bit challenging, so I'll try to highlight them. What is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is a very compressive framework, it's open source, to provide the various types of services. I'm pretty sure it's the most mature current framework so far, where you can annotate most of your application code and just it automatically works. What they introduced in the Spring Boot is, first of all, auto configuration, also called zero configuration, meaning that Spring framework provides a number of templates. We just provide and configure a number of things for you. You want an emailer, just include proper dependency, and automatically just magically happen. It also has a pretty big ecosystem when a number of people, companies are contributing continuously to Spring, and therefore it's a very reliant application. The only problem or challenge with this is migration between the versions, major versions. However, there are also guides which are pretty well describing how it works. All right, Spring provides you a number of tools, provides you a very big sample base, provides you the mention auto configuration, starter templates. Typical starter template you want to use is the web starter template, which provides the web controllers, REST services, REST controllers. All right, how this works with Scala? Both frameworks are based on JVM. Generally, currently, the mainstream JVM is Oracle OpenJDK. I would suggest use the OpenJDK. The source base is exactly the same. In Oracle, you might find a licensed version and you might need to pay for any deployment in production. Because you usually want to keep the testing development and production development be on the same JVM, please just go for OpenJDK. It solves lots of issues later. Another great thing about Java ecosystem are libraries. Two best examples is Apache libraries, Apache Commons, Apache Math, and Guava libraries, Google Guava libraries. I'm pretty sure every Java developer at least know Apache, and probably most of you know about Guava. Guava, I personally find a very nice case collection, locking and non-locking collection can be used for many purposes. In my project, for example, I'm using cache loader to store, expire after some time various object. All right, generally integration, Scala and Spring Boot, it just works. Generally, no more cabinets. There are a couple of issues which I will be demonstrating one after another, which may be a little bit challenging. All right, let's start. First of all, is the quite unusual way you start Spring Boot application, because you need to provide a singleton, like a Scala object, which has a main method, and then it starts the Scala application. Why? Annotations. Spring scans annotations after loading, means every singleton class, the object class, won't be scanned. Therefore, everything has to be created from scratch. Framework then will be scanning them and applying proper annotations to that. This will be very visible in entities. That's another trick area here. As you can see, I'm using case class, which is a very handy class in Java. However, I define variables as variables, not as values. Why? Entities in JPA, Hibernate JPA, has to be setable, has to be mutable. And of course, there's another trick you have to use, is to generate a setter and getter for that. That's why the bin property annotations come from. And it took me a little bit to figure it out. Another way is how you annotate. While the Spring Boot run under Java, will find itself annotations on the method, on the values itself. Here, because how the Java constructs the getters and setters, you have to provide on the field. Therefore, annotations like here, column on the field. Every ordinary annotation has to also be applied to field. Here we have an example with the generated value ID, like that. Another very handy thing in Hibernate, JPA, is the collection tables. Collection table is just a shortcut for one-to-many relationships, while the objects are managed actively, meaning that if we delete the main object, everything on the embedded collection is automatically deleted. You might like it, you might not. In this case, I choose to use it because I just don't want to bother myself with the deleting of the object with a subtable. Another point, that's important point. Spring Boot and JPA is working on the Java collections, not on the Scala collections. Therefore, as you see, I'm using here Java util list. And that's another thing that took me a while to figure it out. Scala collections can be used with as Scala. However, we still have to remember that the field has to be of the Java type. The same thing applies to all the primitives. Long, if you want them to be nullable. Scala mappings of long is to primitive long. You want to have an object. However, in this case, long has always a value being an ID field. It's not a problem. All right, JPA repositories. One of the best things that Spring introduced is the CRUD and JPA repositories, where you define interface or a trait in case of Scala, and it automatically fills the methods for you and SQL for that. First example here, find by owner account ID, just by naming conventions I have already SQL generated, saves lots of time. However, in some cases I need to use the JPA query. Second example, I'm just specifying jQuery. If I really cannot do by jQuery, I can also specify native queries. That's the third example. But then you have to also annotate the method arguments with the naming you want to use later. Here I'm annotating paramedia ID, which I'm later using in the native query. All right, and of course, as before, I have to operate on the Java collections. A Scala array is actually mapped to Java arrays. That's not a problem. However, there is one problem when you actually map Scala arrays to the primitives, like an array of longs, because that's a specialized generic in Scala, so that's another thing you have to be a little bit worried about. Therefore, the list of array of long won't work, but list of array of Java util long will be fine. Another thing to find. Oh, sorry, I also forgot that the primary key also has to be Java long. As you can see, the first line, JPA repository, I'm mapping item to the Java long. That's another one. JSON objects. JSON objects took a little bit to figure out too. This object is used for returning to user JSON. This bit is actually for REST API. As you can see, I want to skip the nullable fields. That's something not really Scala-like, not really functional-like, because I'm using nulls. And that's introduced the null pointer exceptions. Well, hopefully not. However, that's how the Scala is. There is a bridge library, Spring Scala. However, it's quite behind the current Spring release. So I would suggest just to start mapping that in Java. Maybe the situation will improve. Another interesting bit is Java maps. This is the bottom example. When I'm again mapping from the Java util map, and then on the long array, and offers to null. Of course, Scala being a JVM based, I can use all the goodies from the Apache reflection, or so-called lazy to string reflection to string builder. Very handy. That's pretty much how you want to develop. Not writing that much code. Oh, and there's another problem with the data. Because Scala uses its own data types, data types, you want to use the Java. Local datetime I found that works the best. Then you don't need to have annotations like a temporal. Works fine. All right, testing. Testing is something I didn't crack yet. Why? Scala has very nice tooling, Scala tests. When you're practically writing BDD, and it's very human readable, especially for testers. However, they don't integrate that well with the Scala with this Spring Runner. There is a bridge for that. I'm still working on that, but there's a number of issues around this, especially about the order that tests are executed. Therefore, I'm using very simple thing, which is just the normal Spring unit test with the properly named methods and then annotation fixed method order, which is basically run the one after another. It's a little bit hacky, but kind of works. Of course, you can also provide the expected class, like a second example, when the invalid JSON exception is being thrown and captured by test. All right, so that's pretty much how this Spring boots. Those are 5 things, I think the most important. There are a couple of more issues using doubles and using big decimals. However, I think that is pretty much figured out. All right, the next thing bit, how do you want to deploy? One of the easiest thing in SBT is a plugin called SBT native packaging, and you want to leverage as much as possible for that. Basically, you need 5 lines of code. You need to provide the GPA packaging, which you basically build one jar Spring Boot application together with embedded web server. I think it's done. I like to add to my images some scripting like a bash or ash. In Alpine Linux, they don't provide any bash from the start, so just put it ash script plugin. And last one is Docker plugin. Docker plugin will pretty much build the image for you. You need to provide, of course, the base image for that. Here I'm using the JDK Alpine. You need to provide the main class. You want to tag it as the latest, so every time it commits to your image repository, it tags version plus latest. Is very handy when using any deployment on Kubernetes or on the framework like that. And the last bit is the Docker entry point, which is a little bit tricky because you want to provide a security seed for Spring Boot. It's basically, you can just copy that. That's the easiest way, probably. Once I figured out, you don't need to go through that. And of course, like I mentioned before, the Scala boot provides lots of starting templates, and they're creating lots of things for you. One of them is the defaulting to the app.jar. Of course, you can override it. Don't. Just use it like it is. And I believe that will be a very quick introduction to Spring Boot with Scala.
Why using the JDK Alpine and not the JRA?
You need it for Scala to compile.
Okay.
Scala uses a lot of reflection.
I think it would be much bigger, the image, no?
No, the image is like 120 megabytes.
The JDK?
Yeah, this is everything built up. I think the currently application is like 200 megabytes, but I put a lot of images there, things like that. And I also have a lot of communication with AWS. Other AWS libraries can be substantial, especially if you start using those things like SageMaker, things like that. Those are more AI driven. I won't bother with the image size. That's pretty much it. In summary, it works pretty smoothly. There are some things you want to smooth out, but it's probably either copied from this presentation or from other. Just plug it work. So that will be for me. Any more questions anyone has? Yeah, probably.
What advantages do you find in using Scala over Java?
Yeah.
What advantages do you find in using Scala over Java?
Oh, come on, don't get me started. Code is much simpler and removes a lot of boilerplate. Although you have to comment code a lot, otherwise after 3 months you try to find out what those 2 lines do, and that's a bit problematic. I also find easier to avoid null pointer exceptions, but in Spring Boot, because of this Java inheritance, I have to use some nulls as well. So there's a little bit null checking. But then options. Remember that options with the value null defaults to none. And that solves a lot of things, pretty much.
So Java Spring Boot framework, right? Is there a Scala framework? I thought it was Akka.
I think the closest equivalence will be to Play framework. Play, yes. Akka is, well, Akka has a lot of, but personally for me, Akka is about parallelism more.
Well, Scala's so popular, why isn't it more of a popular framework for Scala?
I think the Spring, because Spring was the base of Spring Boot, was developed over years and years and years. And And Java is, sorry, Akka is like used 5 years maybe, like, properly used. So that, I think that's probably. No, well, plays all right, but Spring Boot provides everything for you. It's like a really compressive tool. You have a GPA there, you have a hybrid. You don't have to think about this, how this works, right? And in Play, you have a Slick, which has this functional way of wrapping everything in BDIO, this kind of thing. It works fine, but you have to think about it a little bit more. While the Spring Boot is like a kind of more intuitive. I think this is the maturity. The more you use a framework, the people have ideas. Oh, the first Spring frameworks were terrible. You have to provide an XML for the Beam configuration. Whoa, that was really a terrible thing. Nowadays, you just annotate everything like a service. Hey, it goes. You don't have to bother. Plus inversion of control as well. Yeah, sure.
So the out-of-memory error. So if we use this combination of Scala with Spring Boot, I mean, what would be your recommendation on this?
All right, you have the same problem because this is at the bottom. It is a Spring Boot, is a Java framework. However, what Spring does, and that's my personal experience, is have a very huge stack traces. All right. What you want to do when you have this kind of problems, you run profiler. That don't try to guess. Run profiler. I would suggest using your kit profiler Java. Well, you can use anything else, and give you the stack traces. And the stack traces are very huge. Java has this problem of wrapping, unwrapping, boxing, unboxing, boxing, unboxing. Right? That's the first thing. You probably know about it, so I won't be explaining that much. However, it's also have a problem of concurrency. You see, concurrency in Java is a topic for really big presentation. Generally, I have something. Maybe I can tell something. If I have my laptop, which has 4 cores and 8 cores with HT siblings, hyperthreading siblings, okay. If I have something like atomic long, which is used everywhere in the place, even random uses atomic long below. If I'm modifying one, I have to synchronize cache on every of those HT siblings. So I have a L3 cache, which is the memory for all the CPUs. I have L2 cache on each of those CPUs and HT siblings, depending on architecture. Sometimes they are shared between siblings. I have a separate L2 cache. And now something comes like a get me atomic long. And I have to synchronize everything. See? And that's why they invented the long adders, which only synchronize on the get, so on the read. Then goes to every memory, collapses them together. That's why they introduced something like a thread local random. That's the thing. Because Java was developed when the machines were like 2 CPUs. Two CPUs, I'm great. No, there are machines now 64 CPUs, and that's why the Akka comes in. And that's why you see all the benefits of the functional programming, because they don't need to synchronize the cache. And that's a very big problem. Personally, I was doing some research bits. I had access to big machines, 64 CPUs, 96 gigabytes of RAM plus GPUs, all of it. And I found this. I was running about 10,000 actors on the Akka, and I found this thing. If you start using anything like atomic long, anything synchronizing, all things goes very fast down. And you also want to little bit tune it. Why? Akka, okay, another good aspect of Akka, it allows a lot of configuration. Fine, sometimes you need it. Typical example, practically every thread pulling is done on the stealing thread. It's a fork join thing, fork pattern. Actually, I found out that if I change it to thread pull, normal standard thread pull, 30% faster. So see, this depends if you test, your developer might work on this one, and it's fine. Once you move it to the real production machine, yeah, that's where the good Docker image comes in handy, because then you can open the port for the Java debugger profiler and connect to that. That's where it comes in. That's why I want to do this configuration right. Otherwise, the developers have to log into the. Just no one has time for that. You want to just connect to it, have a Docker image, port open, and I see what's happening there. So, but that's my kind of personal thing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone questions more? Perfect. Thank you very much. Then.
Yeah.